The cell was dark and cold, and the air smelled like metal and dust and old pain. She sat in the corner with her arms around her knees and her eyes half closed, but she was not asleep. She never slept anymore, not since they took her. They called her a traitor. They said she was weak. They said she helped the enemy, but she did not speak, not once in weeks. She just sat there every day as the guards walked past her and laughed and sometimes kicked the bars to see if she would flinch. She never did. Her body was thin and her skin had lost its color, and her back was marked with bruises that never healed. She had once been proud and strong and beautiful among her people. Now she looked like a that girl. But her eyes were still alive, and in those eyes was something the guards could not break. A small spark, a memory, a promise. The guards called her many names, but they never used her real one. Maybe they forgot it, or maybe they just did not care to them. She was just a number, a prisoner, a thing that had shamed the Empire. They said she had saved a human during the war, a boy, a weak, dirty human boy. She had dragged him from the fire and shielded him with her own body. They saw it, they had proof, they had footage. And so they took her and they threw her in this place where the lights flickered, and the food was moldy, and the screams never stopped. But still, she said nothing. Not a word, not a tear, not even when they heard her. But every night when the stars peeked through the cracks in the ceiling, she would close her eyes and see his face. The boy. He had big eyes and messy hair, and he had looked at her like she was a miracle. He had held her hand when she was bleeding. He had whispered thank you over and over as she pushed him into a human ship and told him to run. She had not seen him since years had passed, and yet she still remembered his voice. She remembered his fear, his hope. The others had called her stupid. They said humans were monsters, but she had seen the truth in his eyes. He was just a child. He was scared, and he had not deserved to die now. She sat in his prison and waited for nothing. There were no visitors, no messages, just the sound of boots and the electric hum of the walls. That always buzzed until one day something changed. It was a sound so small most would not hear it. A click, then a soft beat. She looked up slowly. A guard passed by and dropped a food tray, but under the tray something else slid through the bars. It was a tiny metal piece with a blinking light. She stared at it. Her hand shook. She picked it up. It pulsed once, then again. Then she knew. It was a signal, and only one person in the galaxy would know how to send it. Their breath caught in her throat. Was it real? Was he alive? Did he remember she held the blinking piece close to her chest? It felt warm like a heartbeat, like hope. The light blinked again, and a voice echoed faintly inside it. The voice she had not heard in years. It said, I'm coming. Old on her fingers curled around the device as the light faded, and she looked at the wall in front of her for the first time in a long time. She smiled at night. She did not sleep. She sat awake, eyes open, heart beating. She thought of the boy now. A man flying through the stars, looking for her, risking everything for her. She knew they would try to stop him. They would try to catch him, kill him, break him, just like they tried to break her, but he was human, and humans, they never gave up even when it hurt. The Empire would soon learn that again, because one human was coming, and she was still alive. Still breathing, still fighting inside. She would wait. She would not break. Not yet, not ever. The guards passed again. But this time she looked at them, she did not look away. One guard paused, frowned, then walked on. She sat still, back straight, hands in her lap. The stars above blinked quietly in the sky, and somewhere far away a ship changed course, headed for the most dangerous prison in the galaxy, and inside that prison, a silent girl was no longer broken asterisk. The stars outside the window looked calm, but inside the room his heart raced like thunder in a storm. He sat alone, staring at the signal flashing on his screen again. And again, like a heartbeat calling out from the dark. He had not heard that pattern in years, but he knew it by memory. He had made it with her when they were just kids, when she saved his life. He had been a scared boy lost in a war that was not his. He was hiding behind a broken wall, bleeding and cold and shaking from fear. Then she appeared. She was different, not human, but kind. She did not shoot, she did not run. She looked at him and saw someone worth saving, not an enemy, not a threat. Just a boy. She took the hit that was meant for him. She screamed as the energy bolt struck her side. Still, she held his hand and pulled him to safety. Still, she smiled at him, even as her blood soaked the ground. That moment never left him. He had lived because of her, breath because of her, and when her people came and dragged her away, he had screamed until his throat broke. But they did not care. No one cared. Years passed, but the memory stayed. He trained harder than anyone. He joined the fleet. He rose through ranks, all for one reason, to find her, to bring her home. Now the signal blinked on his screen. The exact code only she and he knew. A secret message from her hands. After all this time, she was alive and calling for him. He stood up quickly and grabbed his gear. He walked through the hall like a ghost. No one noticed him. No one stopped him. But if they did, he would not care. He entered the restricted bay where his old ship was locked down. It had not flown in months. It was too fast, too dangerous, too personal. He smiled and ran his hand over its metal skin. This ship had once carried him into battles across the stars. Now it would carry him to her alarms would sound when he left, but it would be too late. He powered up the engines to control. Lights blinked awake like they were waiting. He looked one more time at the signal. Then he launched into the black void of space. As he flew past the moons of the outer rim, he thought of her again. He thought of her eyes, her voice, her hand reaching. For him in the fire, he owed her everything. And now he would return the debt. The path was not safe. The Empire still ruled half the galaxy. Their eyes were everywhere, and she was their prisoner, their shame, their secret. He hacked into an old archive and found what he needed: a list of hidden facilities, a report buried under red warnings. One matched the location of the signal. It was called Station 9, a place not spoken of, traitors and ghosts. No one had ever escaped from it, no one had ever dared to try until now. He checked his fuel, checked his weapons, checked his will. He had no plan. Only a promise. The stars grew brighter as he entered the Empire's space. He knew what waited for him: interceptors, traps, death, but still he pushed forward. Appeared on his scanner. They hailed him, they warned him, they threatened him. He said nothing. He turned off the comms. He dove straight into the fire lasers, flashed past his wings. He spun and dodged. He felt the heat as shots grazed his hull. He was fast but not invisible. One blast struck the side. Alarm scream systems failed. The ship began to fall. He crashed through clouds and landed hard on a silent moon covered in black rock and glowing dust. Everything shook then. Silence. He crawled from the wreck, breathing heavy, limbs aching, but he was alive and he was close-eyed, moved behind the rocks. He raised his weapon and lowered it. The figure stepped forward. It was not a soldier. It was not an enemy. It was another. Alien, thin, worn, but not cruel. The figure looked at him, then spoke softly. You came for her, didn't you? He nodded. The figure smiled. Then come. We have been waiting. He followed through the dark caves, past symbols drawn in blood and fire. There were more of them, aliens with eyes like hers, eyes filled with pain and hope. They told him everything. The prison was near. She was alive, but not for long. She would be executed in 3 days. He clenched his fists. 3 days? That was all he had. He looked at the stars through the crack in the cave wall. They looked peaceful. The war was coming, not for power, not for glory, but for her, and he would burn the sky if that's what it took to set her free. The stars were too quiet as his ship moved through the black void between galaxies. He knew this space well, but something felt wrong. The silence felt fake, like something was hiding behind it, like a breath held too long. He sat at the controls, eyes scanning the screens, hands steady. He was close now, closer than ever. She was near. He could feel it. The signal she sent had stopped suddenly 2 hours ago. Cut off mid-pulse. It was not a mistake. It was a warning. He reached for the comms and tried to contact the rebel group that helped him. No answer, just static. He tapped into his ship's deep scans. Nothing. No ships. No movement. Too clean, too perfect. He frowned and slowed the ship. He changed course, slightly moving to the edge of a nebula full of gas and dust. If there was a trap, he would see it better from the side. Then he saw it. A flicker then? A flash too fast to be space, junk too slow to be a comet. Turned the ship toward the signal's last point. Something shimmered, then the space around him exploded in light. He cursed and pulled the controls hard as laser fire lit up the sky around him. Red beams sliced through the black, dozens of ships uncloaked at once surrounding him like a net. Empire ships fast and cruel. He pushed the engine to full power. His ship dove and twisted through the laser storm. The Empire had waited for him. They knew he was coming. He rolled under a destroyer's belly and launched a blast from his side cannon. The explosion tore a hole in the ship's wing. Smoke spilled into space. But more ships came. They were not trying to destroy him. They were trying to drive him somewhere. He checked his map. Only one path was open. A narrow pass through a belt of sharp floating rocks. It was a death route. He had no choice. He flew into it, engines screaming, rocks spun and crashed into each other like wild beasts. He dodged left. He twisted right. Each second could be his last behind him. The Empire followed faster and faster. He fired 2 mines behind him. The blast knocked 3 ships off course, but it was not enough. He reached the end of the belt and saw the old moon where he had planned to land. Smoke still rose from where his first crash had been. He aimed for the surface. Then the ground exploded. A massive cannon hidden below the sand fired at his ship, a direct hit to the left side. The ship spun out of control. He slammed into the ground, and everything went black. He woke up. Minutes later, smoke filled the cockpit. Blood on his face, but he was breathing. He pulled himself free and stumbled outside. The air was thin, sharp. Then he heard voices not human. Not cruel rebels. They ran toward him and pulled him to safety. Just before another shot hit the ship and turned it to fire, he coughed and looked at their faces, young old alien, but all with the same look. They believed in something. They believed in her. One step forward and helped him sit up. She is alive, the rebels said, but not for long. They moved quickly through the rocks and caves the leader showed him a small screen. It showed her face, pale, tired, but still alive. She was in the high prison now. The place above the sky built into a floating fortress. And in 2 days she would be taken to the hollow pit, a deep chamber where no one came back. They would make her vanish, erase her from all memory. He stood up, shaking not from pain, from rage. They tried to trap him. They failed now. He had seen their weakness, their greed, their pride. He asked for a ship, a map. Away inside, the rebels nodded. They had waited for someone like him, someone who remembered her, not as a traitor, but as a hero. That night they set her on a fire deep underground. He stared at the flames and saw her face again. That moment when she took the hit, that moment when she smiled. Through pain, he would not let her die alone in a cage above the stars. She saved him once now. It was his turn. The stars above were no longer silent. They were watching, waiting. And he was ready to answer. Asterisk. The walls were cold and the chains were tighter than before, and the lights above her head never turned off. She sat on the floor of her cell, eyes open. Body still not moving, not speaking, not blinking. The guard said she was finished. They said her time was near. They said no one would come. No one ever came. They were wrong, but she did not believe them at first when they told her a human had entered the sector. When they laughed and said he had been shot down. When they said his body was burning on the moon outside the prison rings. She turned her face to the wall and closed her eyes. She did not cry. She had no tears left. She had cried them all in the first year. Now she only had silence. And silence was stronger than pain. They brought her food sometimes. Sometimes not. They hit her sometimes. Sometimes not. It did not matter. She had stopped feeling the difference long ago. But the memory stayed. She remembered the sound of his voice, the way he looked at her with wide eyes and fear, the way he held her hand and said thank you like it was. The only word he knew. She had seen so many faces since then, angry faces, cold faces. Not his, never his. She thought she had dreamed him. That maybe he had never been real, that maybe he was just soft thought her mind made to keep her alive. Then the guard came. He was new, younger than the others. He never spoke. He never hit her. He only watched her from the edge of the light, like he was trying to understand. One day he left something near the food tray. She did not touch it at first. It looked like paper, real paper, strange in this place of metal and glass. Later, when the light dimmed, she reached for it. It was a picture, a face drawn in soft lines, his face. The human boy, now older, eyes sharper, hair longer, but the same. Look, it was him alive. She pressed the paper to her chest, and for a moment her breath caught. The cold around her broke, her chest shook, her fingers trembled. He remembered he was coming. She stood slowly for the first time in days. The chains clinked around her ankles. Her body ached, but she stood tall. She looked at the guard through the bars. He looked back, but said nothing. She gave him the picture. He nodded and turned away. The next day, she heard whispers from other cells. A rebel ship. Near. The outer moon's a breach in the outer system. They blamed it on pirates. But she knew it was him that night she was moved. 4 guards came and dragged her from the cell. They said she would be processed. They said she would be forgotten. They took her to the high tower, the place above all others, where the sky looked black, even with the lights on, where no prisoner had ever left. The halls were clean. Too clean, no blood, no screams, just silence. They placed her in a glass room, no chains, no guards. Just a chair and a screen. The screen blinked and a voice spoke cold, sharp. Not human, you betrayed your people, the voice said. You helped the enemy, you broke our trust. She said nothing. The voice continued, tomorrow we will erase you. No record, no memory. You will vanish still. She said nothing, but inside her something burned. He was out there. She could feel it. He would come. He always did. The screen turned off and the lights dimmed. She sat alone, back straight, eyes forward. They tried to break her, but they had failed. They locked her away, but her spirit moved through stars. They silenced her. But her name lived in whispers and hope, and somewhere beyond the tower, beyond the sky. A ship moved closer with fire in its heart and a promise in its soul. She smiled for the first time in a long time. She was not broken. She was waiting. The prison gate stood tall and wide like the jaws of some giant beast ready to swallow anything that came too close. Guards stood on towers with black armor and glowing red eyes, holding weapons that never missed. Drones flew in circles above, scanning every inch of ground, every breath of wind, every whisper of sound. He walked toward them with slow, careful steps, dressed in a worker's uniform covered in dirt and grease, face hidden behind a helmet with fake ID codes burned into its side. Each second felt like a hammer hitting his chest, but he kept walking steady, strong, silent. The scanner light passed over him. A long pause, then a beep, then the gate opened. He walked through without a word, eyes fixed forward, heart racing in silence. He was inside. The halls smelled like rust and burned oil. Screams echoed through the pipes. The walls were lined with cameras. Every step had to be perfect. One mistake, and it was over. He moved like a shadow past the workstations and security doors. He used stolen keys and copied maps from the rebels. Every hallway, every checkpoint had been studied for days. There was no time for fear. Reached the lower sector where the prisoners were processed, metal cells stacked like boxes filled with eyes. I had no hope left. He knew she was not there. They had moved her higher to the tower. To the place they called the sky cage. He had to climb. He found the service shaft behind an old wall. Where no one looked anymore, he pulled open the panel and slipped inside. The air was tight, and hot wires sparked beside his face. His hands bled as he climbed the narrow ladder for what felt like forever. Each level he passed brought more danger. Security got tighter. Doors got louder. The lights turned from yellow to red to white. He reached the last hatch and stopped to breathe. Above him was the tower's lowest floor. From there he could reach her. Pushed open the hatch and crawled out into a dark hallway. He stayed low, moved fast, a map in his hand. Drawn by someone who once worked here, it showed her room, her cage, her time. He reached the door and froze. 2 guards stood outside, laughing. They had no idea he was behind them. He pulled a small charge from his belt, pressed it to the wall beside. The door, it blinked twice, then sent a shock pulse. The lights above flickered. The guards collapsed like dolls. He grabbed the key card from one and opened the door. She was sitting in the center of the room, eyes closed back, straight, hands on her knees. Like she had become part of the silence. She looked up slowly for a second. She did not believe what she saw. He pulled off his helmet. Her breath caught. Her lips parted. Her hand shook. He stepped forward and knelt in front of her. She reached out and touched his face like she was afraid he would vanish. He smiled and nodded. I came. He whispered, I never stopped looking. She tried to speak. No words came. Only tears. He pulled her to her feet. She was weak, but she stood together. They moved toward the hall, but the alarm screamed red. Lights flashed. Doors slammed. Voices shouted they had been found. He handed her a stun baton and took the lead. They ran through the halls side by side. Guards appeared at every turn. Shots fired. He returned fire. She struck. One with the baton. They moved like wind through fire. He guided her to the main shaft. The plan was simple. Reach the landing bay. Get to the rebel ship waiting in orbit. Escape. But the path was blocked. Dozens of soldiers stood at the gate. He looked at her. She looked at him. They turned and ran the other way. Found a vent system. Crawled through smoke and heat and fire. She coughed. He pushed forward. They dropped into a lower hall. The floor cracked from the heat. The power core was near overloading. Had an idea they could reroute the power surge to blow the gate open. Risky, deadly. But it might work. She nodded before he even finished. Together, they ran to the power room, dodged sparks, bypassed locks. Wired the system to explode. They ran back as the core lit up behind them. The blast shook the tower. The gate burst apart. Rebels poured in, with shouts and fire fighting the guards. Clearing the path, he and she ran through the chaos, hands locked, hearts beating. They reached the ship, the ramp lowered. She stumbled. He caught her. They stepped inside as lasers flew past. The door closed. The rose Irisk. The prison shook from the blast, and fire spilled across the sky as alarms howled like wild beasts caught in a storm of metal. And rage smoke rose from the towers, and guards screamed orders into radios. That no longer worked as systems failed, one by one across the prison walls. She ran beside him, breath, sharp eyes, wide chains still clinging to her wrists. But her feet moved. Fast like the fear inside her had turned into fire, he pulled her forward, guiding her through broken doors and flickering lights while behind them. Explosions tore apart the halls they had once feared. The rebels were inside now. They came through. The breach riding stolen machines with banners burning in red. They shouted her name not as a traitor, but as a hero, as a symbol. As a spark that could burn down the whole empire, she heard them, she wanted to believe it, but all she knew was that her body hurt and her lungs burned and her heart was not ready to trust again. Not yet, but he was here. He never let go of her hand. Not even when the ground shook beneath him. Not even when the ceiling fell behind them. Not even when she tripped and fell to her knees with tears in her eyes and blood on her lip. He lifted her. He whispered her name, the real one, the one only he remembered. She stood again because of that name. They reached the flight deck where smoke covered the walls and sparks flew from the broken panels. One of the rebel ships was there, waiting engines hot, ramp open. But guards poured in from every side. Black armor, red eyes, silent and fast like shadows with blades. The rebels fought back. One screamed her name as he fell. Another grabbed her arm and pulled her behind cover. He fired at the soldiers while shouting for them to run. She looked at him and saw something in his face. Not fear, not anger, but hope, the same hope he had when he was just a boy, and she had pulled him from the fire. Now it was her turn. She stood up and picked up a fallen blaster. Her arm shook, but she held it tight. She fired once, then again. A guard fell, then another. He looked at her with wide eyes. She smiled through the pain. They pushed forward. Step by step, fighting through the smoke and screams. A blast knocked them both off their feet. Her ears rang. She blinked and saw him reaching for her through the dust. She crawled toward him, and together they stood. The ramp was just ahead, so close. Voice shouted from above, the enemy commander, tall and cold, with eyes like knives. "You will not leave this place," the voice said. "You belong to us now." She looked at the commander and took a deep breath. "No," she said, "not anymore." She raised the blaster and fired into the ceiling above him. The structure cracked, metal beams fell. The commander disappeared in the collapse. She turned to him. Now she said, "Run." They reached the ramp and climbed aboard as the last of the rebels covered their escape. The door closed behind them. The engines roared. The ship lifted into the burning sky through the window. They saw the prison below crumbling into fire. Towers fell, walls broke. The sky cage was gone. He sat beside her, breathing hard. She leaned back, eyes closed, then opened them and looked at him. "You came." She said. "You really came, always." He said, "Always." She touched her wrist where the chains had been. "Gone now, gone forever." The ship moved through the clouds, then stars, then silence. She looked at Earthon. "The map glowing soft and blue in the distance home," he said. "It is your home now too." She smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because she knew now. She was not alone, and they would never break her again. The stars were calm outside the window, but inside the ship everything shook and screamed as sirens blared, and the walls trembled under the weight of fire and speed. They had made it out of the prison, but the fight was not over, not yet. Enemy ships followed close behind, firing with every weapon they had as the rebel ship tried to break through the last defense ring before reaching safe space. Sat at the pilot seat, hands locked on the controls, sweat running down his face, eyes locked on the path ahead. She stood beside him, holding the wall for balance, watching the enemy fleet growing larger behind them. The ship was fast, but not fast enough. The engines were failing, the fuel was low, the shields were cracked. They had minutes left. Maybe less. She looked at him, and he looked back, and in that moment there was no fear between them, only fire, only the promise they had both made. That they would never stop, not for pain, not for fear, not even for death. The rebel commander came over. The come with static in his voice. "You need to break through now," he shouted. "If you don't make it in the next 30 seconds, they'll cut off the path and you'll be trapped forever." He pushed the ship forward, engines roaring like beasts as the Stars blurred past the window. Laser fire lit up the sky around them, red and gold and white like a storm of lightning made of hate. She climbed to the weapons panel and activated the last two cannons. Her fingers moved fast without thinking, firing. At anything that moved behind them, one enemy ship exploded, then another, but more came, always more. The ship shook again as a blast hit the left side. Sparks flew, the lights flickered, the hull cracked. She fell to the floor and he caught her before. She hit the wall, he can't hold it together much longer, he said. She nodded and stood again, blood running down her arm, but she did not stop. Engine core is breaking, said the engineer over the comm. If it goes, we all go. She looked at the core panel and saw the readings too high, too hot, too fast. She turned to him with a plan in her eyes. Let me go to the core, she said. I can slow it down. I know how he grabbed her hand and shook his head. You won't survive the heat. You just got your freedom. I won't let you lose it again. She stepped closer and placed her hand on his chest. I won't lose anything, she said. If I die, it's my choice, but if I do nothing, we both die. They win, I won't let them win. He looked at her for a long moment and then nodded once. She ran toward the engine room as he kept the ship moving through the fire. Each second felt like forever. Each beep of the warning system felt like a countdown to the end inside. The engine room, the heat was thick like fire in her lungs. The lights were red. The pipes hissed. The core pulsed like a heart ready to burst. She pulled off the panel and reached into the burning wire's hands, shaking muscles, screaming. She rewired the coolant feed, rerouted the energy burst, slowed the spin just enough. The core groaned and steadied, but her vision blurred and her legs gave out. She fell to the floor, eyes fading, heart slowing, breath gone. Then strong arms lifted her. He had come for her again. He carried her back to the front as the last enemy ship closed in. He placed her in the seat beside him, her eyes open, just enough to see the stars. Ahead, we're almost there, he whispered. Rebel fleet appeared ahead, opening a path. They fired on the enemy. The last of the enemy ships exploded in a blaze of red and black silence, followed real silence. The kind that feels heavy and light at the same time. They had made it. The rebel ship entered safe space and slowed. The stars were calm again. The alarm stopped. The fire faded. He held her hand as she opened her eyes wider. We're free, she said. He smiled and nodded outside. The window, earth, waited blue and bright and full of life. She had never seen it with her own eyes. Now she would. When they landed, people cheered. They shouted her name, not in anger, not in fear, but in honor. She stepped down from the ship and felt the ground under her feet. Warm, real home. He stood beside her, holding her hand. They tried to break her. They tried to erase her. They failed because one human remembered. And one girl never gave up, and now the whole galaxy would remember her name.